The following Stealing the Mind Bible Conference presentation is by Carrie Parks and is entitled God's Gift of Fear. For a free catalog of all of our tapes and books, call Compass at 1-800-977-2177 or on the web at compass.org.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And yeah, my hair does look great, doesn't it? Oh, Tim had to say that. Last year, I spent the whole year being bald. I was going through chemotherapy. So everybody knew me bald. So, hair is like this wonderful thing for me. Yeah, praise God. Our children are taught in schools, do not talk to strangers. They are dangerous and want to hurt you. If any adult makes you feel uncomfortable, run away and report them immediately. What a great way to keep our children from learning new things. These are the words of Joseph Duncan III, a registered level 3 sex offender, who on May 15th of 2005 allegedly broke into the Coeur d'Alene home of Brenda Groney. He tied Brenda, her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, and 13-year-old son Slade, and left them in the living room. He forced Brenda to call her two other sleeping children, 8-year-old Shasta and 9-year-old Dylan. He had them tied up. He carried them to a truck. He then returned to the house and beat Mark, Brenda, and Slade to death with a framing hammer. He took the two children to remote locations in western Montana, where he repeatedly assaulted the children, used them to make pornographic videos, and eventually murdered Dylan. The sole survivor, Shasta, was identified on July 2nd at a Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, and she was rescued. Duncan is awaiting trial as of this program. As North Idaho was reeling from these horrific crimes, less than 3 weeks later, John Rollins Tuggle, a registered sex offender who had been convicted of raping his own sister-in-law, who was 12 years old at the time, and impregnating her. He then, when he got out of prison, took his own 12-year-old daughter to a remote section of Shoshone County, Idaho, where he assaulted, stabbed her, and left her for dead. Tonight's presentation is on God's gift of fear, the lies, deception, and hidden information found in the words and actions of others. My background is as a forensic artist. I became fascinated with signs of deception because of a particular case I worked on. This case was a case of Tom DiBartolo. On November 6, 1996, Tom DiBartolo took a walk in a North Spokane park with his wife, Patty. Patty didn't return from that walk. The 39-year-old mother of 5 children was shot execution style in the head, and DiBartolo was shot in the side in his apparent effort to save her. Now, DiBartolo was a decorated veteran of the Spokane Sheriff's Department and was a real-life hero. I was brought in to interview him, to draw the face of the man he said assaulted him. Halfway through that drawing, I knew he was lying. I knew he had shot his own wife and was covering the crime. And that launched my fascination with deception. I now travel across the country teaching signs of deception to law enforcement professionals. Several years after that case, Bill Perkins, who was just up here of Compass International, asked me if I would do a biblical version of signs of deception for the Compass program. I thought about it, and I started to do some research, and I want to share this with you. The Bible is full of lies. That got your attention, didn't it? That is to say, the Bible is full of examples and descriptions of deception as if it were written right out of a law enforcement textbook. But what makes this so unusual is the culture of the Bible is vastly different from our culture, and most signs of deception are culturally based. And yet, here are the signs found in the pages of the Bible. I'm not saying that the Bible lies. It's the most astonishing book ever written. God has made it very clear what he thinks about lies and liars. In the Bible, the biblical view says that deceive, lying tongue, false witness are mentioned almost 200 times. Lying is the 9th of the 10 commandments, 2 of the 7 abominations of God. It's forbidden in the Christian community. It's an expression of evil, conceals hatred, leads to pride and oppression. Satan is considered the father of lies, and it's incompatible with the divine nature of God. 1 Peter 5 through 8 give us a biblical view of what we think about for people like Joseph Duncan. In it, it says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, as the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour." Tonight, we'll be looking at the subtle clues that tell us we need to be aware in protecting ourselves and our family. We actually have a clue in this verse, as a roaring lion. The Bible is telling us that we can hear deception, that we can hear deception in the words and language of others. We'll be looking at the words and language of various people to see what they're really saying to us. This is a technique known as statement analysis. We'll also be looking at an example that comes from Joseph Duncan's blog. Now, for those of you who are not computer literate, a blog is a combination of two words, weblog. It's basically an internet journal in which people express their thoughts and ideas, and you're allowed to comment on them in a separate area. Joseph Duncan published his thoughts prior to, and in fact, up to 2 days before he allegedly abducted the children and committed the murders. Much of what he wrote was self-serving, but he does give us a fascinating insight in his words on his thoughts. The roaring lion has many faces. Without raising your hands, how many of you have gone online on the internet to see if you have any registered sex offenders in your neighborhood? If you're watching this on a videotape, how many of you have checked it in your own area? There are currently 259 registered violent sex offenders just in Kootenai County. That doesn't count the non-violent offenders, nor the unregistered, nor those who haven't been caught. Joseph Duncan wouldn't have shown up because he's not registered in the state of Idaho. The roaring lion is everywhere, but the roaring lion will reveal himself in his language. Proverbs 16:17 says, "A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul." Language is rather like a rapidly flowing river. The large rocks which cause the river to flow around it are the obvious statements and words that people give that we don't need any clues on. They're telling us outright what they're thinking. Now, a good example of someone who doesn't conceal anything in his thoughts would be Michael Moore. Michael Moore. Michael Moore is known for his, quote, documentaries on such movies as Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11. It's generally very easy to determine what Michael Moore is thinking by his words. For example, when he talked about Republicans, he said, "I want you to put aside your self-afflicted label of Republican, conservative, born-again, capitalistic, ditto-head, right-winger, and just talk to me as an American on the common ground we both call America." What he thinks about Democrats. What's always been great about people who are Democrats and progressive people, liberals, independents, whoever classifies themselves along that end of the political spectrum, is that you're there because you have a good heart. Words such as this are the large boulders that we can easily see in the river of language. But the river also can bump along and create rapids. And under these rapids, we know there are additional boulders. There's more going on underneath. Language, too, bumps over what people say. And these bumps can be recognized. And tonight I'm going to show you some of the rapids that tell you not necessarily that someone is lying at that point, but that there is additional information going on that is not being revealed except by way of that bump. It will allow you to ask the questions you need to ask. This is called the principle of statement analysis, and we're going to talk about statement analysis. Statement analysis is understanding the verbal or written clues that other people give us. And the first principle is that every word counts. You can't add to what people are saying, or you cannot ignore what people are saying. An example of this is Tanya Harding, the story of Tanya Harding. On January 6, 1994, figure skater Nancy Kerrigan was preparing for the U.S. National Figure Skating Championship in Detroit. After completing a practice session, Nancy was attacked by an unknown assailant with a police baton. She was unable to compete with her injury. Now, Tanya Harding was a competitor and figure skater along with Nancy Kerrigan. It turned out that the attack was by Shane Stant, who was hired by the former husband of Tanya Harding. There was great speculation as to whether Tanya was aware or involved in the action. Let's look at her words. This is part of her statement from January 11th, in which she said, "I didn't do anything wrong, and neither did anyone else." First of all, she's not saying she didn't do it. She only says that she didn't do anything wrong. We don't know what Tanya Harding considers wrong. But she goes on to say, neither did anyone else. We know that attempting to cripple another person is wrong. She later admitted to her involvement. This occurs because in language there are no synonyms. Our language is unique to each one of us. When we speak, we're creating an idea. We reach into our unique dictionary to express those words. In our dictionary, one word always means the same thing. This is called the law of identity. In a certain specific context, set of facts and circumstances, a proposition, thing, or situation has only one single meaning. Looking back at Joseph Duncan's blog, he says, and you will see his unique dictionary here, "I believe there is a right and a wrong." And notice the quotes around right and wrong. "But I realize intimately that these are relative to my perceptions of reality, which is almost totally in my head." He goes on to say, "So I don't expect others to see the same things as right and wrong as I do, but I will defend what I think is right to my own death." I certainly hope so. An additional principle of statement analysis is a change of language. A change of language always indicates a change in the circumstances, situation, or thinking of the individual. When the language changes, it means something has changed. I'll give you an example of this. If I said to you, "I heard a knock on my door," I opened the door and found a man standing there. He was asking me for directions. Then the jerk pulled out a knife. I shut the door and called the police. Now, was there a change of my language? Certainly. He was a man. He became the jerk. Was there anything in the activity or actions that accounted for the language change? A minor detail of a knife. Therefore, my language changed, telling you I was thinking of something different because of the circumstances. But what would happen if I told you this story? I heard a knock at my door. I opened the door and found a man standing there. The jerk asked me for directions. I shut the door. My language has changed. She's gone from being a man to the jerk. But my story has not told you why. Yet my language has told you that there is a bump in the language. There's a bump in the river. Something happened. My language tells you that something happened at that point. And that would be your question. What happened at that point? Let's look at the words of Susan Smith. Susan Smith was a young mother in Union, South Carolina, who one day decided she didn't want her children anymore. So she strapped her two young sons into their car seat, and she drove the car into John D. Long Lake. She later made this statement: "When I was at John D. Long Lake, I had never been so scared and unsure as I did then. I wanted to end my life so bad and was in my car ready to go down that ramp into the water. And I did go part way, but I stopped. I went again and stopped. I then got out of the car and stood by the car, a nervous wreck." At what point did Susan Smith actually make that final decision to kill her children? Did her language bump? It did. When it went from being my car to the car. My car would not do the deed, but the car was going to do the deed. At the point where her language changed was when her decision was made. Proverbs 12:13 says, "The wicked is ensnared by the transgressions of his lips." Lies 101. We're going to go into some lying basics. All lies are deception. Not all deception is lying. You can add to the truth, subtract, change, deflect, disguise, hide and reveal information, imitate the truth, or cover and camouflage information. All lies are a form of deception. Lies are always a distortion of the truth, and they're always deliberate, and most people don't lie. They deceive. The reason why most people don't lie is, first of all, the lie may be illogical or easily disproved by other people, or the liar may contradict himself at a later time. An example of an illogical lie would be Michael Moore. Michael Moore made this statement: if the passengers on the 9/11 planes had included black men, those killers with their puny bodies and unimpressive small knives would have been crushed by the dudes, who, as we all know, take no disrespect from anyone. Michael Moore claimed that we would never have had a 9/11 had there been black men aboard the planes. An example of contradiction, we'll go back to my favorite this evening, Michael Moore again. And remember earlier he said, what's always been great about people who are Democrats, but at another point he said, I'm the anti-Democrat. I have railed against the Democrats for a long time. Another example of contradiction comes from the LDS Articles of Faith by James E. Talmage. Now, LDS stands for Latter-day Saints, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. This is one of their major works. On page 42 of this book, Talmage writes, God is omnipresent. That means he is everywhere at the same time. But by page 43, he said, but this does not mean that the actual person of any member of the Godhead can be physically present in more than one place at any one time. But later on the page, he went on to say, God's person, cannot be in more than one place at any one time. An August 4th Time magazine with Gordon Hinckley, who is the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in this interview, he was asked about a specific teaching. The teaching comes from something called the King Follett Sermon, which was delivered by Joseph Smith. And in the King Follett Sermon, Joseph Smith put forth the idea that God was once a man, and he progressed to becoming God, just as men on earth here can progress to becoming God and get their own planets. Now, they didn't spell it totally out there, but basically that eternal progression is spelled out in the King Follett Sermon. When asked about this, Hinckley said, I don't know that we teach it. I don't know that we emphasize it. I don't know a lot about it, and I don't know that others know a lot about it. Unfortunately, in an article that came out of November of the same year, he writes, the whole design of the gospel is to lead us onward and upward to greater achievement, even eventually to godhood. Incidentally, whether or not they teach it, the doctrine is found in the Encyclopedia of Mormonism, Doctrines and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, Commentary, and numerous other places. Most people don't lie, and many people actually confess. Now, the confession may be hidden in their words, or it may be overt, and the confession may be delivered sarcastically. An example of this is in this sentence. It's brutal to hear that I'm guilty. It's an ignorant public and media that needs some kind of scandal. Now, buried within this sentence is the words, I'm guilty. It feels good to confess. So you want to confess, but you don't want to come right out and say it. So if you bury it like this, you are confessing, and yet still it's hidden. By the way, this is a statement of Scott Peterson, who was the one that murdered his wife, Lacey Peterson. Confessions may be overt. They may come right out and tell you what they're thinking. Here's an example. Whether I ascend to heaven or descend to hell or go to any other place, and if we go to hell, we will turn the devils out of doors and make a heaven of it. Where these people are, there is good society. What do we care where we are if the society be good? Now, this very easily could be a teaching of a New Age person, or Unitarian Universalists might go along with this, but this is actually the statement of Joseph Smith made on June 23rd, 1843. This statement is not an anti-Mormon statement. It is found in the History of the Church, which is published by the LDS Church, Volume 5, page 517. Joseph Duncan III gives us confessions. A psychologist might call me a sociopath because I'm rationalizing the fact that I'm insensitive to how others feel. Maybe we need more sociopaths then. Duncan has just told you that he knows he's a sociopath. The confession may be delivered sarcastically. This is an exchange between David Koresh, whose real name was Vernon Howell, who was the head of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and another man who was the husband of a follower of David Koresh. The man's name was Samuel Henry. Samuel Henry said, Jesus did say that there will be false Christs and false prophets. And David Koresh answered sarcastically, I am one of those. I didn't do it. It's rarely said by a guilty person. Instead, they will use some form of modifier, qualifier. They'll use the morally unable, or they may change the language. But a guilty person can rarely say, I, first person, didn't, past tense, do it. Joseph Duncan in his blog said, so, I've been accused of molesting a little boy. Those close to me know I didn't do it. Now, I just told you that a guilty person can't say that. But he isn't really saying that because he modified it. He said, those close to me know. What he's adding here is that he was obviously morally unable to have done it. The claim of being morally unable would be phrased like this: I'm not that kind of person. I'm not like that. I couldn't or wouldn't for whatever reason. I was raised better than that. But in this statement, not only does he say those close to me know I didn't do it, he's claiming to be morally unable, but he can't even do that because he knows he is. He says, those close to me know. He has someone else claim it for him. His blog goes on to say, they said they were looking for pictures of two boys who were molested. Of course, I am clean. That's not the same as saying I didn't do it. He's just claiming that he is clean. They might find some pictures of me naked, non-sexual mode photos I used once to make a birthday card for a girlfriend once, but that's about it. That's once too many onces. And he further says, that's about it. That's not it. That's only about it, which means there is more information. Going on with the statement. So I've been accused of molesting a little boy. Those close to me know I didn't do it, of course. How could I? I'm not even a pedophile. He used the modifier even because he can't come right out and say, I'm not a pedophile, because that's a lie, and he knows he is. Bill Clinton's speech to the Bill Clinton. I love that guy, I'm telling you. Oh, I used to have so much material. It was fresh, new every day. It's been rough. Bill Clinton's speech to the American public. As you know, in a deposition in January, I was asked questions about my relationship with Monica Lewinsky. While my answers were legally accurate, I had not volunteered information. He didn't say he didn't do it, only that his answers were legally accurate. He goes on to say, an independent federal agency found no evidence of any wrongdoing by me or my wife. Doesn't mean he didn't do it. It just means there is no evidence that he did it. In a Newsweek article with the domestic terrorist Timothy McVeigh, who was the domestic terrorist that blew up the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995, Newsweek came right out and asked him, this is the question that everyone wants to know. Did you do it? Answer, the only way we can really answer that is to say we are going to plead not guilty. Most people don't lie, they deceive. And one of the ways they can deceive is to add to the truth. We're going to look here at an article from Comparing LDS Beliefs, Comparing Mormon Beliefs with First Century Christianity, which was in Ensign magazine. The doctrine of salvation through faith alone is not a biblical doctrine. There are no instances in the New Testament of the phrase grace alone or faith alone. Now, this statement is rendered true by adding the word alone. By adding the word alone, they've added to it. If they had turned over to, say, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, they would have read, "For by grace alone, ye are saved through faith alone, and that of not of yourselves alone. It is the gift of God alone, not of works alone, lest any man should boast." The words alone are unnecessary words, therefore they should not have appeared. Subtracting from the truth is also an easy way. In fact, most people subtract from the truth. They just leave out that itsy-bitsy little teeny tiny part that said, "Okay, I took the money." We're going to look at a statement. And what we're looking for here is passive language. Passive language is a very good indicator that something happened. Passive language is when something happened with nobody doing the action. The door opened by some unknown entity. And usually passive language is used to conceal the identity of the person doing it. The statement, "I arrived at work at 7:45 a.m. When I entered the building, I noticed Mr. Johnson's office door was opened. I know that he locks his door when he leaves in the evening. I thought that maybe he had come to work early, so I looked into his office. I did not see Mr. Johnson, but I saw that the safe in his office was opened. I looked around, but did not see anyone. I knew my boss would be arriving soon. As soon as he arrived at work, I reported the theft to him. My boss then called the police." Now, what is he saying here? He's saying four things. I noticed Mr. Johnson's office door was opened. The safe in his office was opened. I did not see anyone. I reported this theft to him. That's what the statement contains. But this is what he's really saying. I noticed Mr. Johnson's office door was opened, passive language, because I opened it. The safe in his office was opened, passive language. I opened it. And the minor little bitty detail, I took the money. Additional examples of passive language comes from Diane Downs. Now, Diane Downs was kind of an early day Susan Smith. She was in Springfield, Oregon. She had 3 little children. And one day she decided she didn't want to be a mommy anymore either. She took her 3 children out into the country and shot them. She killed 1 child. This occurred in May of 1983. Now, she claimed a man had come at her and attacked her with the gun. This is her statement during an interview. I didn't even realize the man had a gun and what he was going to do. I looked into the car and saw my daughter being shot. From that point on, I don't have any memory until the man faced me again. I can't tell you what I did or did not do. Do you see the passive language in her statement? I saw my daughter being shot. She's telling you the truth because she shot him. But she used passive language to hide the identity of the shooter. And the second statement that should jump out at you is, I can't tell you what I did or did not do. Of course she can't tell you. She'd have to confess if she told you. Freudian slip. Congressman Gary Condit admitted to an affair with the intern Chandra Levy. Her body was discovered a year after her disappearance in May of 2002. Let's look at a portion of the interview with Gary Condit. The question was asked by Larry King, but if they ask it, you don't shy. But if they ask it, you had an affair, you don't tell them. Condit answered, if my constituents come up and ask me questions, I answer they. That's how he answered that question. But you don't tell them, do you? Condit answered, I'll tell anything they ask me. I answer their questions. If they need to know an answer, I give them a question. Body language. And in particular, we're going to be looking at 2 parts of body language. The first part of body language is when the words a person says and what they're doing don't match. Like, I really enjoyed your speech tonight. Whew, man, that was a really good speech. The second part of body language is steepling behavior. And steepling behavior is this. It can be steepling like this. You can steeple like this. And steepling behavior usually indicates that the person who is steepling feels that they are vastly superior to you. And if the steepling goes in front of the mouth, they actually not only feel they are superior to you, but they're not going to tell you about it. Oh. Okay, he had to come back. We're going to be looking at an example on a videotape of an interview with Ted Bundy. This was the last interview of Ted Bundy, and he's being interviewed by Dr. James Dobson of Focus in the Family. Now, this is only a small portion of it, but now having given the background of what I've told you, I want you to pay very close attention. There's going to be a couple things I want you to pay attention to. The first is he's going to open with a comment about predators, which is a very prophetic comment on his part. The second is I want you to watch carefully his expression, his facial expression, when he talks about violence on television and the movies. Now, prior to this, he had been crying, his lip would quiver, and so on. But when he talks about violence, his eyes light up, and he can barely keep the smile. He's going to start grinning with sheer pleasure. He's saying, oh, violence is really bad, but he can't keep his expression in check. And the third thing is, after he has stated this, he's going to steeple Dr. Dobson. Go ahead with the tape.
I felt the pain and I felt the horror again of all that. And I can only hope that those who I have harmed, those who I've caused so much grief, even if they don't believe my expression of sorrow and remorse, will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence. And what scares me, and let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today, with stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy.
Can we predict the behavior of predators? To a certain extent, we can look for it. Joseph Duncan III said we should also require all women to cover their bodies more in public, like they do in more civilized countries. Maybe even require them to cover their pretty little faces in public and send them to jail for a day or two if they get snooty about it. Shasta was picked because she was running around in a bathing suit, playing in her pool. Let's look at some of the red flags of the predator. And what we're looking for are the words and actions that should be red flags to a woman in a vulnerable situation. The first red flag we're going to look at is something called forced teaming. Now, forced teaming is the use of the word we. We're going to come up with a hypothetical example. We've got a woman in a strange city. She's waiting for an elevator to take her up to her hotel room. And a man comes up and says, whoa, you know, we've been waiting here for a long time. How long do you think we're going to have to wait before that elevator comes? Now, he's using the word we as a way to establish trust. It's a we're in the same boat type of thing, and it's not about coincidence. It's intentional and it's directed. The projection of a shared purpose. It's always inappropriate. The second term we're going to look at is charm, and we're talking about here a verb, not a trait, as if you say to yourself, this man is trying to charm me, as opposed to what a charming individual. Charm is to compel or control by allure or attraction. A third trait we would look at is too many details. Let's go back to that elevator situation. The woman's standing there, a fellow comes up and says, whoa, we've been waiting here for quite a while. Wonder when it's going to come. You know, my wife is out there shopping right now. She said I should come back to the hotel and drop some things off, but I said, oh, you know, I'll stay out with you. He's giving way too much information, way too many details. He's trying to engage the woman in conversation and create a shared purpose with her. And the fourth one we'll look at is something called typecasting. Let's say that the other three don't work. He might resort to using typecasting, which is to cast a slight slur upon the woman by saying, oh, I suppose a woman like you wouldn't be seen in public with a man like me. Now, he said that, he's going to sting her. That's going to hurt a little bit. And she might respond, no, it isn't that. He has now achieved his goal, which was to engage her in conversation. A wise man fears and departs from evil, but we can't always recognize the face, the lies, or the deception of our adversaries. One story in the Bible tells us of a lie that was almost successful, a lie that took the intervention of God to change the outcome. We're looking at Herod at this point in Matthew 2:8. And he, Herod, sent them, the wise men, to Bethlehem and said 5 things. Go and search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring me word again that I might come and worship him also. He's going to tell the truth in almost every one of these. Go search diligently for the young child. That's the truth. That's what he wants them to do. And when you have found him, that's the truth. That's what he wants them to do. Bring me word again. That's the truth. That's what he wants them to do. That I might come, that's true. And he only lies in one place, and worship him also. That was not his intention. In fact, it was such a believable lie that we have to go over to Matthew 2:12 to understand, and being warned of God in a dream that they, meaning the wise men, should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. Today I've shared a few clues to recognizing the lies of deception of others. But the best way to protect ourselves is to study the truth. Bank tellers are trained to recognize forgery not by studying forgery, but by studying the shape, color, texture, feel, and images of real currency. I hope today you'll come away with real truth that will be your armor against the roaring lion. I thank you very much for your time.
This has been God's Gift of Fear, presented by Carrie Parks. To receive a free catalog of all of our Bible teaching books and tapes, information on upcoming Bible conferences in your area, or details of our missionary outreach, call 800-977-2177 24 hours a day, or on the web at compass.org.